Hi, this is Kogito, and I'm back with another Through the Ages video. In the last video, we saw my two-player game against Aaron Weber in the second round of the World Championships. You don't see that on this screenshot because I forgot to take a screenshot after that game was over. Sorry about that. But basically, I won against Aaron Weber, but Bull3 also won in their two-player game against Aaron Weber, meaning that I'm still only 8 points ahead of Bull3 with 3 games left to go, which means my remaining 2 games against Bull3 will be extremely important. And in this video, we'll be seeing one of those 2 remaining games, a 3-player game between me, Bull3, and Vampire D, with the stakes essentially being if I finish ahead of Bull3, then because of my victory against Aaron Weber, I will be guaranteed to finish first in the group. But if Bull3 finishes ahead of me, then it would probably come down to our 2-player game. So the stakes have literally never been higher. And without further ado, let's take a look. So in this game I'm playing third. We can take a quick look at the leaders and wonders. In age 3, there are only theater leaders Marlena, and there's no Hollywood, so theaters don't look great this game. There are 2 science leaders, Bill Gates and Marie Curie, and the space flight, so some science synergy. Most of the leaders, though, are more all-purpose, Churchill with military, Gandhi to protect yourself, Pierre, there's the Pierre internet combo, though, and Mandela as a more all-purpose leader. In age 2, we have the railroad and the ocean liner service as powerful wonders, as well as the Maria to pair with the ocean liner service. There's also Napoleon and Nobel as 2 powerful H2 leaders. All the other H2 leaders, though, are culture leaders, except for Cook, but there's no Suez Canal. And without much culture payoff in age 3, that perhaps means that Nobel, Maria Theresa, and Napoleon will be the 3 leaders in H2 that everyone is going to want to target. In age 1, there aren't any military action leaders. There are some powerful wonders, though, including the Machu Picchu, so that's important to keep in mind. Bull3 is going first, takes Aristotle. I think that I probably would have taken Stonehenge because I'm a big fan of Stonehenge. Aristotle maybe not as good going first, but a leader is more important than a wonder. As we saw, there are powerful age 1 wonders. With a science leader, you can exist without an age A wonder, so I think it's understandable. Vampire D does take the Stonehenge as well as a Richland. I think that's good. As for me, I think that perhaps my major choice was essentially between, do I want Confucius, who is probably the most powerful AJ leader, Boudica in 3-player game less good, and she might not show up. So I think my choice here was essentially between taking Confucius or taking Ashoka plus the engineering genius. Because even though Ashoka perhaps worse than Confucius, I am going last, so he's a bit better. I'll get the best AJ yellow card with him as well. Colossus, not really a consideration, I think, without the Suez Canal. So I did end up going Ashoka. I think that the weakness of going Ashoka and Engineering Genius is because I don't know if I will get an Age A wonder like this, even if I do. I mean, Colosseum, probably good, because there's no military action among the Age 1 leaders. So Colosseum would be good, Library of Alexandria would be good, but neither of them are in the row, so for that reason I might not get an AJ wonder. So it is a bit risky for that reason, and with that as a consideration, Confucius would be more consistent, perhaps, as a leader. On the other hand, I think Ashoka is a good leader when going last, even though I think I haven't really learned how to play with him ideally yet, but I do want to learn. Maybe that's another reason I took Ashoka. I feel like Ashoka is maybe the trickiest AJ leader to use well, and I want to practice using him. And obviously, getting him with the Engineering Genius, I felt was just more powerful, maybe a higher ceiling than just Confucius by himself. Age 1 begins. Bull3 elects Aristotle, builds a mine, and takes the Acropolis. I think that makes sense to me. I mean, they could have increased the population, but these are bad AJ yellow cards, so I understand taking the Acropolis, even a 3-player game. Vampire D takes Confucius and elects him, makes sense. Builds a mine and increases population. I agree with this play. But as for me, I was, luckily, I am able to get this Colosseum for 1 civil action, which with Ashoka and the Engineering Genius, I definitely do want. Aside from that, I also want to build a mine and increase my population. I could have, I think, increasing my population, better use of my civil action than saving a resource with the urban growth. Bull3 takes the Monarchy, one of the earliest Age 1 cards, will probably have enough science with Aristotle to justify this, and in Age 1 there's 2 codes of laws. So with the bonus from Aristotle, and also the Acropolis giving him science playing the monarchy, I understand taking it. Increases the population and chooses to build one stage of the Acropolis instead of the lab. That, on the other hand, is more questionable to me. Maybe they wanted to keep the free population in case there's a development of religion or development of warfare, but I still think that getting that extra science earlier seems better to me. But that's my opinion. Vampire D Seeds reveals the development of science. Takes the alchemy for one civil action and is able to upgrade it this turn instead of building their second mine, but with only a single more resource from the developments, they'll be able to build a second alchemy directly, so this makes sense to me. And takes a frugality. As for my turn, I do siege, which means that the turn I ended up deciding on with Shoka, I wouldn't be in corruption even if a resource event was revealed. I figured that I think that was an inhabited territory. With the Colosseum, I should have a higher chance than my opponents to get colonization cards in my hand. I revealed development of politics. Unfortunately, no colonization cards with that. I do get a second tactic, although I already had a strong tactic in my hand. And so I do want to build the second lab. I think I didn't have anything better to save, I think, rather than theoretically. I could have completed the Colosseum this turn with the... No, I couldn't have completed that. I could have saved up, possibly, for the Colosseum, but I think getting that extra science going, losing 2 science just to get this a turn earlier, not worth it. I do take the bread and circuses, so even with this happy face, I'll need a happy face solution by the end of Age 1, and I think especially with Pierre in the game, the bread and circuses is a viable card. Now, I am risking maybe I'll get the development of religion later, which would make this a bit awkward. But like I said, since there's Pierre in the game, I think this is a worthwhile card to take. And additionally, I have Ashoka, so I want more colors in my hand. And I think... Do I take another color? Yeah, so with the bread and circuses, I'm also able to take the irrigation, which will give me the full Ashoka bonus. Irrigation, not the best card to take for 2 civil actions. I could perhaps consider taking the Swordsman instead, but I have Knight's Tactics in my hand, so I probably wouldn't play the Swordsman. I could consider the Breakthrough, but then I wouldn't get the full Ashoka bonus. I could consider the Masonry, but I think I'm not going to have enough science to afford it. And the Irrigation at least gives me something to upgrade. I think the Irrigation also pairs well with the Colosseum, because getting more population is better when I have 1 free happy face from the Colosseum. So I think the Irrigation is a bit better. It's also synergizes well with the Ocean Liner service, which has Maria in the game as well. So I think the Irrigation is better than it usually is in my position, and worth the 2 civil actions because it gives me the full Ashoka bonus. I just got the Phalanx tactic because I think this is a better tactic in general. I draw a vast territory and a cultural influence. Both 3 C's does reveal the development of religion, so I will be missing out on it. I'll be the only player missing out on it, so that's a bit unfortunate, but I do have the bread and circuses, so it's also fine, I think. Both 3 chooses to finish their Acropolis, which lets them develop the monarchy immediately because of the science discount. And decides to take Saladin and the Swordsman. Chooses to keep Aristotle for now instead of electing Saladin, but I think since Bull 3 is delaying their second lab for so long, I think that does make sense to value the extra science you get from Aristotle over the free action from Saladin, civil action from Saladin, especially since they already have their 5th civil action with the monarchy. Passes up the Breakthrough though. But Saladin is a strong leader. Vampire D Seeds reveals the development of agriculture, increases the population, takes Nostradamus, also a strong leader, elects him, increases the population, and takes the Engineering Genius 1, which is a strong yellow card. So reveals the Fighting Bane tactic because they probably have 2 other cards in their hand they want to keep. I think this was a good turn from Vampire D. Now it's my turn. I choose not to seed. We can see how this is obviously one of the weaknesses of Ashoka. You get corruption issues easier, so it's going to be... I think the turn I'm going to take is going to use not use 8 resources, so I don't want to seed and risk revealing one of the remaining resource events. I do take the Code of Laws for 1 civil action, one of the best Age 1 cards. I think even though I'm, don't have any extra science for my leader or my wonder or anything, or alchemies, I still think this is a good card to have for 1 civil action, especially since it'll help me with my Ashoka bonus. And I do have enough science this turn to play it. I could consider instead maybe playing and upgrading irrigations, but I think I would rather spend those resources on the... I can spend those resources on the Colosseum instead, or as we'll see, I can also get out of corruption by increasing my population 2 times. And the reason that I do this instead of... Because I could complete the Colosseum, although... Yeah, completing the Colosseum, I could only do that with my Engineering Genius, and that wouldn't take me out of corruption. So the only really good way I have for getting out of corruption is to do this, and I'll also build a warrior. But I also do this because it leaves me with one last civil action that I can take Columbus. I think Columbus is probably the strongest Age 1 leader in my position, both because he has excellent synergy with Ashoka, since I can keep him in my hand until the end of Age 1, thus making it a lot easier to get the full Ashoka bonus, and also because I drew the vast territory last turn, the best Age 1 territory, so I know that I have a really strong colony to pair with him. So I do think this is a good turn, considering the developments that were revealed and how difficult it was for me to get out of corruption. I don't think any of the other cards... Obviously, I do want the Knights, but I don't think I have the leeway to take it, considering my corruption issues for 3 civil actions. None of the other cards in the row were particularly appealing to me. Universe of Ass I can't play anyway, so... I keep the Vast Territory and the Tactic, because these are both absolutely critical cards for me. And I draw another Tactic. Both 3 seeds, the worst tactic. Both 3 seeds reveals the development of crap, so it's a good thing that I didn't seed. Thus flipping the event deck, both 3 is able to take the Universitas. Now Elect Saladin will they rebuild their lab? No, they'll only increase their population. I think it probably would have... Arguably, it would have been better to build the second lab instead of increasing the population and then it just sitting around doing nothing. But maybe there will be a use for this population I'm not seeing. It is also true that with the Universitas coming soon... Oh, I guess the reason both 3 did it this way is because they wanted to build the Universitas next turn with the 9 resources. So that makes sense to me. With the Universitas, that'll make up for how long they've delayed their lab. Right. Oh, actually, no. Because to get out of corruption, both 3 will have to build a second warrior anyway. So, yeah, I do think... I think putting this into the lab would have made more sense than increasing their population. But maybe there's something I'm not seeing. Vampire D seeds with Nostradamus reveals the Raiders. Unfortunately, I'm hit by it, but when I'm playing against Nostradamus, I think that's to be expected. And takes the second copy of Monarchy, builds 1 stage with Stonehenge, which gives them enough science to play the Monarchy, so I'm the only player without Monarchy, but at least that means that it should be easier for me to get the Stage 2 government form, because neither of them will want it. Upgrades the second lab, builds the warriors for their fighting band tactic, thus making them, tying them in strength on both 3, with Nostradamus, obviously they're not the weakest. So I obviously don't want to seed the vast territory with Columbus, and I wouldn't want to seed anyway because I'm the weakest. I do want to get this Colosseum going. I think it's the best way to spend my resources this turn to help get me out of corruption, and I don't... I could upgrade irrigations instead, but I value getting this going sooner anyway, get an extra military card draw. Unfortunately, that means that I do have to build a 3rd warrior to get out of corruption. Definitely not where I want to be with the medieval army tactic. I'm not sure if there was a way I could have planned out my turns to avoid having to do this. I guess I could have not used the Engineering Genius, but then chances... I mean, I could maybe get the Forbidden City or the Himeji Castle, but the chances of completing either of them before the end of Age 1 seems slim right now, so if I don't use the Engineering Genius now, I'll probably never use it. It still feels really bad to do this, though, with the Medieval Army tactic. It's not making me stronger than both 3 or Vampire D anyway. So maybe instead of doing this, well, I could have maybe... I don't think upgrading my irrigations... Let's see, I spent 6 resources this way. So, yeah, spending 4 resources upgrading my irrigations wouldn't have got me out of corruption anyway. I can't increase my population. I think it's just kind of a bad situation I find myself in at the moment, having these 3 warriors. I mean, on the other hand, I do know that I had seeded a colony, so... I could potentially send maybe 2 of these warriors away on the colony. On the other hand, I don't have any colonization cards in my hand right now. I will at least get some population boost with the Columbus Vast territory later. I'm also getting extra food with Ashoka, and I have this extra happy face from the Colosseum, so that makes these 3 warriors less painful. Still not ideal though, so maybe I should have played my earlier turns differently to not end up in this situation. Though I'm also in this situation because all those resource developments were revealed, which I couldn't necessarily have predicted. So it might just be an unfortunate turn of events. Regardless, though, with my last 2 civil actions, I take the Knights. I could have taken this Knights for 1 civil action, but with the remaining civil action, all I could realistically have done would be to take this Patriotism, which I didn't really feel like I needed, especially with the Colosseum and with the Ashoka bonus. So instead, I figured taking these Knights, the advantage this has is it means that no one will get the 2nd copy of Knights because it'll be discarded. So that means that no one will be able to copy the medieval tactic army I play. They'll be stuck with infantry tactics, which will be better for me. So I think that I valued denying both 3 and Vampire D this Knights more than I valued having this Patriotism in my hand. I do play the Fighting Band tactic though, which... Okay, so I guess this is one advantage of building the warrior. With the Fighting Band tactic, it does let me at least be stronger than both 3 with the event deck flipped. That is certainly nice. A nice situation to be in. It does cost me 1 card draw, but that's okay. There's a good chance I won't want to seed next turn anyway, because they'll get stronger. And I draw a Dark Aegis, which actually might be a card I want to seed. Bull 3 builds a 3rd warrior and plays the Legion tactic, so they're now the strongest. Builds 1 stage of the universe with us and takes the alchemy, so it looks like they'll be having a lot of science going pretty soon. It's probably looking to build this alchemy directly. And also takes that Patriotism as well as a rich land and the drama. Drama, interesting card to take. Like I said, not a lot of theater synergy in Age 3. There's also no Bach. I mean, there is Shakespeare, but and 2 copies of journalism, so that might be an idea both 3 is having. But I guess there's not really that much better to spend the last civil action on, especially with the science. I mean, they'll have more science soon, but they have less science now. Warfare might not be happening. They have their 3rd military action already. Don't need the Brennan circuses with the religion already, so maybe there just wasn't anything better to do. It might clog up their hand, but they'll have six hand space, so probably should be fine. Vampire D seeds with Nostradamus isn't the weakest I am, so I get hit by the Reign of Terror. Definitely unfortunate, but I think I'll lose a warrior to it, which isn't the end of the world because I didn't really want these 3 warriors anyway. So it's okay. It's not a disaster for me. Vampire D increases the population with Frugality, finishes the Stonehenge before the age ends, takes the breakthrough for 1 civil action. Makes sense. I don't see because I'm the weakest, even though I might like the Dark Ages in the deck. I also don't have any colonization cards, so even if my colony gets revealed, I wouldn't really be able to compete for it anyway. So I didn't see any point seeding, especially since I will be increasing my strength this turn, with the Colosseum giving me the science discount for the Knights. I'm able to increase my population and build a Knight and switch to the Medieval Army tactic, which at least ties me in strength with both 3s. So I guess I will still be the weakest after both 3's turn, but I might... But maybe on both 3's turn, but maybe after both 3's turn, both 3 won't increase their strength and I'll be not the weakest. As for my remaining 3 civil actions, I have 3 resources that I can't really spend because I don't have any science, and indeed at this point in the game I was quite worried about my science situation. This is the downside of playing the Code of Laws. It's a strong card, but it takes 6 science, and when I don't have any science wonders or leaders or alchemies going, that depletes me of science quite quickly. So even though it's a really big cost to take this cultural heritage for 2 civil actions right now, and I'll have to spend a 3rd civil action on it later, I thought that with only having 2 science next turn, I would also, you know, I mean, I could increase my population, but then it would be unhappy, so I would have almost nothing to do next turn with only 2 science. Culture Heritage gives me 4 science, at least then I could maybe play the Brennan Circuses or the Irrigation. They give me something to do, and it just, in general, I was really feeling the science squeeze at this point in the game, especially since I'm going to need an H2 government form, so I figured any science I could get would be worth it, even at the pretty substantial civil action cost. But I also, there wasn't really anything else. I mean, I could take one of these wonders, but it's towards the end of Age 1. I'm not going to be on, I'm still on Bronze Mines. I'm going to pass up this Iron because I don't have the science for it anytime soon. So at this rate, I'm kind of thought I might as well wait for coal. So I thought that it wouldn't be a good idea to take an Age 1 Wonder, so I rather valued the science from this. I elected Columbus, obviously the age is about to end, and I take the Rich Land, especially since there's a good chance I'll be going for coal in this game. The Rich Land's going to be a very important card for me. I draw the Uncertain Borders. Both 3 seeds. Reveals the Barbarians. Vampire D is among the 2 weakest because everyone kind of has, with the Nostradamus bonus, everyone has the same amount of strength. And Vampire D has the most culture from Nostradamus, so at least this will be bad for one of my opponents. Both 3 builds the second stage of the Universitas. Then plays the Patriotism to upgrade 2 warriors, so they are now the strongest. Takes the Iron, and takes the second copy of Code of Laws. So their hand is kind of full of a lot of technologies right now, with only 1 science income. They will get more science soon from the Universitas at least, but, you know, this maybe is still, it's gonna make, they do at least have 6 hand size, but it might make their next turns a bit harder with this many techs in their hand that they probably won't play. Age 2 begins. Vampire D seeds, reveals a foray. At least I will be a party to this foray because Nostradamus doesn't help with it. Vampire D increases their population, takes the swordsman, important tech for them to have, builds 1 directly, adopts the Legion tactic, so they are now, have 9 strength with Nostradamus above both 3, and they are tied with regular strength with me. And takes a copy of Reserves for 2 civil actions, expensive copy of Reserves, but looks like they didn't want any of these cards anyway, and I agree with them. Maybe could have, the Urban Growth already has the labs upgraded, so I get this play. Now it's my turn, and so I believe I do use Columbus immediately here. I do want to increase my population again so I can get a second Knights going so that I won't be the weakest. That I thought was very important. And for that reason, I felt comfortable using my political action for Columbus this turn because I didn't want to cede while I was the weakest because of Nostradamus. So, yep. So, yeah, that lets me increase my population and build a Knights, so now I'm the strongest, which is nice. I still have to get out of corruption, though. And in order to do that, I decided to, first of all, take an Iron. Right, so I actually built a second copy of Knights to get out of corruption. Definitely and kind of an awkward position for me. The 2 copies of Selective Breeding are on the row right now. However, I already have the irrigation, and so I decided to pass up on the Selective Breeding. Almost certainly both 3 and Vampire D are going to take those 2 copies, but I figured first of all, with the vast territory, the irrigation becomes better because you have these extra yellow tokens, and in addition, there is the Ocean Liner service in this game, so I figured that there was enough good irrigation synergy with the vast territory I already had to be able to depend on irrigation for the rest of the game, and I thought that the extra 2 science that the Selective Breeding would cost would actually be quite costly for me in this situation because of my severe science issues. So I did want to play the Cultural Heritage now before it was, you know, later in Age 2 when there'll be more Age 2 cards on the road that I might want to take. As a result, I am not only giving up the Selective Breeding, I'm also giving up these yellow cards, Age 1 year cards in Age 2, not that important. I do value the Iron over those. Couple of reasons for taking the Iron, even though it's quite late at this point in the game. First of all, Vampire D is playing before me, so if it comes down to a competition of coal between me and Vampire D will probably be able to take the first copy of coal. Second of all, again, I have these severe science issues. The Iron costs 2 less science than the coal, which might actually be very relevant for me right now. Especially since I currently have not actually upgraded any of my resource buildings yet. And upgrading getting both coal and scientific method can be extremely difficult. I think it is maybe possible occasionally, but I think it's just really hard to do both to be able to afford both of them when you have to spend so much of your game on just bronze and philosophy. Just getting, you know, getting the resources and the science for both of those technologies can be really difficult. So that's why you almost always want either the Iron or the Alchemy. I'm obviously missing out on Alchemy in this game, so I figured it was better for me to take the Iron now. With the Cultural Heritage, I will be able to upgrade my Iron Mines, 2 of my Iron Mines next turn with the Rich Land. So I thought that that would be more important than that would be stronger for me than waiting for the coal. Instead, now I can focus on getting the scientific method later. Now again, unfortunately, in order to get out of corruption, I had to build this third knight. It does give me a bit more safety and strength against both 3 and Vampire D, but if I didn't have to build that knight, then I would have had enough resources next turn to upgrade all 3 iron mines. So the 1 blue cube, the vast territory, cost me actually being a pretty big detriment to me in this situation. But like I said, I thought that without playing the vast territory this turn, I wouldn't have been able to compete in strength with the second army. So I thought that was necessary. And at least this knight is doing something for me. It also might be useful for colonization, even though I'm not drawing any colonization cards. So maybe my chances of winning a colony aren't high regardless, but maybe. This was a difficult turn. Not a great turn for me, but maybe in my situation there wasn't a better turn available. I draw a war in territory, and so now with 1 full turn passed after age 1, we can take a look at the relative situations of each player. Culture not that important this early in the game. I am behind, but not by that much. On the other hand, I'm the only player without culture production, which means that probably by the end of age 2, I'll be more significantly behind in culture. Science, though, is definitely a bigger issue for me. Well, just economy in general, right? Because if we look at the economic situation, no one's upgraded their bronze mines yet, but Vampire D at least has upgraded their alchemies, and as a result, they have a lot of science. With the alchemies and the Stonehenge, they have a lot more science than both 3 or I do. And my science situation, especially considering that I'll want an H2 government form, there's no Robespierre in the game, so getting that H2 government form going might be pretty difficult for me. Kind of hoping for a scientific method to be available soon. At least if it's available by my next turn, I will be able to upgrade it once, which I probably will end up doing, actually, because the science is looking pretty difficult for me at the moment. But if a scientific method isn't available for me relatively soon, I might start having some serious science issues. So that's definitely my biggest weakness at the moment. I'm also a bit behind on civil actions of both 3, but that's because of Saladin. At least, as for my other players, both 3, same as me, has not upgraded any of their economic buildings. On the other hand, they will have this Universitas going soon, so their science situation will look better than me soon. Vampire D might be, I think, is probably in the best position right now. Not only do they have the culture lead, but they also have the economic lead at the moment. What they're giving up for that is the strength situation, but they will be able to, I think they're competing pretty much evenly with both 3, minus the Acropolis in terms of tactic and military attack. So, and they have Nostradamus for as long as they want them. So I think Vampire D is definitely in the lead at the moment. We can see Vampire D, I think, did have both the strongest wonder and the strongest AJ wonder and the strongest AJ leader with Confucius. So I think from that perspective, it makes sense that they're ahead right now. But there's still a lot of game left to play. Both increases the population, builds a 4th mine, interestingly. We'll see. I guess they were worried about their economic situation and didn't want to... wasn't going to have the science for the iron next turn regardless. Well, they would have had the science for this iron next turn if that population had been the philosophy instead. So I think definitely this population would have been better served in the philosophy, I think, even with the universe with us. They do take the selected breeding there, definitely an important card. Finish upgrading their warriors to swordsmen and take a reserves. Do they float a civil action? Yeah. But unfortunately, both 3 ends up having to float a civil action because their hand is full. So we can see here the downside of both 3 taking all those techs. Maybe this was another reason why the philosophy should have been built, because both 3 has all these techs in their hand that they really want to start playing soon. So I think we can see the weakness of taking all these technologies in hand. Even though both 3 had Aristotle for a lot of AJ, they weren't able to play a lot of these techs, and now they're clogging up their hand. Vampire D Seeds reveals the inhabited territory. Because I don't have any colonization cards, I'm only willing to bid my knight for it. I wasn't willing to bid a full army for it. That felt too much. I wouldn't have been able to rebuild it. Maybe I could have considered doing that, though, because I will not be getting the selective breeding. So, but on the other hand, I didn't want to spend my resources rebuilding my military this turn, really. I wanted to spend my resources upgrading my iron mines so I could get my economy going. So I think that was another reason why I wasn't hugely into winning this territory. I do have the vast territory already, regardless. There's not a Suez Canal in the game, so I think it's a close decision. Vampire D is able to win it just for Warrior and a colonization card. Maybe could have considered sending the Swordsman instead of the Warrior and keeping the colonization card. But we'll see if that extra 1 resource they save helps them out. They are able to rebuild that Swordsman, so it gives them 1 more strength than they would otherwise have had, which makes them, I guess after their turn means they won't be the weakest before Bull 3, so it makes them, from that perspective, they take the selective breeding in the rich land to help those select building upgrades, and takes the transcontinental railroad. They will be on coals because they missed on the iron, so this is definitely a strong wonder for them. Now it's my turn. I seed. That was... forget which card that was now, sorry. But I am the strongest, so I want to seed regardless. I reveal the wealthy territory. I guess that was an H1 card. Oh yeah, that was the... no, I have the Dark Ages in my hand. I didn't want to see the Dark Ages because I'm probably going to have to save up for the Conmon that I'm about to take. Anyway, I want to see because I'm the strongest. I reveal the wealthy territory. This one, I am still not able to win because I'm still... I think bidding an army for this doesn't really make sense because I'd be losing 5 resources only to gain 6, so... both 3 is able to end up winning this because they also have a colonization card. I am at least very happy to see this Conmon available for me 1 civil action. This was probably the #1 H2 card I wanted, maybe second to the scientific method. So it being available for 1 civil action is very helpful for me, even though I might not be able to play it for a while. I wanted it in my hand. I actually decided to work on my mines on my farms first instead of my mines. Kind of an interesting decision. Maybe it was partly because it costs 1 science cheaper, and I really am looking to save up my science for this Conmon soon. Maybe I was also considering that I might want, at this rate, because it's already like into age 2, and also both copies of coal are already on the row, that I might be wanting to upgrade to coals instead of irons after all. It's so late into age 2 anyway. I also have the rich land in my hand, so I think that was probably why I did the irrigation. It was like, well, I'm gonna need to do this regardless because I'm not getting the selective breedings, but I might do coal instead of iron, so I'll wait at least until next turn to do the irons. I can get out of corruption by upgrading them, and I want to do so. It'll also help me with my strength, which maybe my strength is the one sort of thing I have going on my opponents. The main thing I have going on my opponents is I'm stronger than them. So I also kind of wanted to push that. I was thinking that I might be able to do this war and territory in the future. This would also help me because I'm only on irrigations. This would help me with my population. So this was definitely a course I was considering. And if I wanted to do this next turn, I would need to be able to increase my population to build a 3rd army. So that's another reason to upgrade the farms first. My less civil action, I do really want this revolutionary idea. If I want to get the Conmon in a reasonable amount of time, I think I really, really need this for science. It also will let me... well, I won't have the resources to upgrade my selective breedings next turn, unfortunately. That is one weakness of doing it this way. But I will have enough resources with the rich land to upgrade to coals next turn, potentially. So that also gives me that option. I draw a mobile artillery tactic, which, with the amount of knights I have, is definitely a possible tactic I could get into, as well as a strategic territory and acceptance of supremacy, which pretty rare to see this happen. Probably isn't going to happen this game either. I did pass up on the strategy for 3 civil actions, unfortunately, but I thought that I did not have nearly enough science that I was definitely not going to be able to play this. Also, I have the Colosseum, which makes it less important. So even though I was leaving it to Bull 3 for 1 civil action, well, Bull 3's hand is kind of full anyway. Maybe we'll go to Vampire T for 1 civil action. Definitely not ideal, but I wasn't willing to spend 3 civil actions just to deny it from my opponents. Bull 3 does offer Vampire D the International Trade Agreement, so this is actually the 3rd of 3 3-player games in this group where I am not a party to the International Trade Agreement. A little unfortunate there, but oh well. Bull 3 now we can see has to end up destroying this mine that they built, I think, 2 turns earlier, so that ended up just kind of being 2 civil actions accomplishing nothing. They are at least able to upgrade and build an alchemy directly, so now they've definitely fixed their science production issue at least, even though they still have a mine issue, though at least they have 4 resource production from the International Trade Agreement. And they take a breakthrough and play their reserves preemptively also to get it out of their hand because of their hand space issues. This does lead the strategy to Vampire D, but I think that was unavoidable. Vampire D seizes the Nostradamus, reveals the Good Harvest. I think actually this was probably the card I seeded, so another reason I wanted to upgrade to Irrigations was to give me more food. This would give me kind of double food with the Good Harvest. Vampire D takes the Cavalryman, important tech for them to have. Does take one of the coals, obviously also a very important card for them to have in general, especially with the railroad. Is able to upgrade 1 coal with that rich land. So good turn from Vampire D. Now it's my turn. I'm the strongest. So I think that I do want to seed, and I'll probably seed the territory, yeah. Even though I still have no colonization cards, I was kind of hoping I could maybe draw some, and just also I didn't want the Dark Ages in the deck again because I was going to probably be saving up because I needed the H2 government form. My opponents do not need an H2 government form, so even though Vampire D has a lot of science sort of stacking up right now, it wouldn't be a while before the Dark Ages gets revealed, so there's a good chance Vampire D will spend their science before the Dark Ages will get revealed, and instead I will want to be saving up my science for the Kanman. So that's why I wanted to see because I'm strongest, so I seeded the other card, the Strategic Territory. I reveal the Pestilence, not great for me, though not awful. I still get to keep my army after losing my knight. Vampire D will be worse for them, looks like, although they'll probably just lose this religion without it being a big deal, so also not a big deal for them, or for Bull 3 losing this idle worker, so it probably will actually hurt me the most out of my opponents, arguably, maybe tied with Vampire D. So this turn I had to decide whether I was going to upgrade the coal mines or not, and I ended up deciding against it and going for the iron mines. And again, the major reason being that we have the scientific method now is on the road for 1 civil action, so I will be able to play it. I can't upgrade it this turn, so I want to upgrade the iron instead. But the issue is if I upgraded coal, which I could do with the revolutionary idea, but then I wouldn't have enough science for the scientific method next turn. And I felt that for that reason, if I chose the coal, it would take me probably 3 turns to upgrade the coal, which means it would be by the end of H2 by the time I would finally get the scientific methods going. That felt too long for me again. That's the problem why it's extremely really hard to get both of these in one game. Whereas if I develop the iron this turn with the rich land, I can build 2 iron mines. Then next turn I will have enough science with the revolutionary idea and just barely enough resources to upgrade 1 scientific method. So I thought that was a better use of, that was stronger than doing the coal, because even though the coal would give me more resources in the long term, it would delay my science production significantly, whereas doing it this way would let me get my science production going sooner, and especially since I really wanted to play this Kanman relatively soon, I felt that it was more important to get the science production going sooner than the long-term resource production from the coals. This does mean that I'm upgrading my iron mines in the middle, in the latter half of H2, which is very much not ideal, but it's how the game ended up going for me. But I do take that scientific method. I also take the pro sports. It looks like I probably won't need to play the Bread and Circuses before the end of the age because of all the yellow tokens I got from the vast territory. So, given that, I decided that the Team Sports obviously is a much more efficient technology than the Bread and Circuses, and I probably wouldn't want to play this before the end of the age regardless. So this lets me only start dealing with my happy faces in age 3, which is preferable to me. It's also available only for 1 civil action. I just decided I didn't really want the Cavalryman. I think this tactic is a strong H2 tactic that could potentially serve me until the end of age 3, so I thought that I didn't really need the Cavalryman for age 3 tactics for that reason. Although it is true that I could miss out on the tactics, but the cannons, but there are still both copies remaining, so I thought there was a good chance I could get one of those cannons for my tactic here. So I valued the Team Sports over the Cavalryman for that reason. I just got the Dark Ages for reasons already stated. I draw an Annex, a Prosperity, and a Fortifications tactic. Bull 3. At least Bull 3 also has had to delay their iron upgrades by quite a bit. They get theirs actually after I do. Get an efficient upgrade to pair with them. Now, another weakness of the play I made, though, this turn is that I did pass up on Maria. And I have had to operate for most of Age 2 already. One of the weaknesses of Columbus is that he's one shot, and so I've kind of had to upgrade for operate without I've had to operate without a leader until now. And so Maria, I guess, was available for me on 2 civil actions last turn. I felt that the things I was doing instead were more important. I really wanted the scientific method for the next turn. I wanted this team sports eventually. I wanted to finally get my resources going this turn, or else they would have been delayed significantly. So I valued that over getting Maria now, and I figured that Nobel and Napoleon would also be potentially strong leaders for me to have. On the other hand, this does carry a strong risk that neither of these leaders will show up for a while. And Maria definitely would have been good in my position, because I have all this food saved up, and I have serious science issues. So Maria would have helped me a lot with my science problem, would have also potentially helped me. I mean, looks like I'm going to be the strongest for a little while, so the resources from Maria probably wouldn't have been helpful for a while. The ocean liner service, maybe I won't get anyway, and even if I do, it might be hard for me to spend the resources on. I might not even want to get it, at the end of Age 2. So Maria, not as strong as she usually is in a 3-player game in my position, but still would have helped me a lot with my science. Not as much as Nobel would help me with my science, but again, I don't know when I might get Nobel. So maybe I should have more strongly considered at least taking Maria, if not necessarily playing her, because I wasn't increasing my population last turn. On the other hand, like I said, everything else I did this turn was very important, so I think it was a close call. Both they does take the cavalryman, important tech for them, but that is all right after upgrading their mines. That's all they're able to do. Vampire D Seeds reveals the border conflict. At least I win this. Bolthea is the weakest player. Vampire D takes the first copy of cannons and the justice system. Important card for them to have with the monarchy. They have enough science to play it immediately this turn. It means that they can stay out of corruption without having to put this worker into military. So, justice system doing a fair amount of work for them. Looks like a good turn from Vampire D. Now it's my turn. I'm still the strongest. I figure with the team sports, I should eventually be able to get a fair amount of food off of the prosperity. I thought the prosperity was also a good card to have in the deck as general, because again, I'm on irrigations. My opponents will at least one day be on the selective breedings. So I thought that the prosperity would be stronger for me than for my opponents, so I want it in the deck anyway, and I'm also the strongest. I reveal the knowledge of the ancients, which does give me some much needed science. I do need to play the revolutionary here to develop the scientific method, though. Luckily, with the border conflict, I have enough resources to also finish upgrading my iron mines, so I'm finally getting my economic situation improving, even though it's towards the end of Age 2, better late than never. In order to get out of corruption, I need to increase my population, so that does take up all my civil actions, which unfortunately means I think all of this was pretty important to do. It does mean I'll be missing out mainly on this copy of Rifleman, I think, is the main weakness. On the other hand, neither of my tactics in my hand are infantry tactics. Now, another cost of this is it means I don't take this cannon for 3 military actions, for 3 civil actions. But again, I think if I took this cannon, especially after the border conflict, it would have been a lot harder for me to get out of corruption, maybe by putting them into my units. But if I have the cannons, I'd want to put my population into cannons anyway. I wouldn't have been able to upgrade my scientific method this turn if I had taken the cannons. So I felt that in my situation, because I had to delay my economic upgrades for so long, I needed to get them going sooner rather than later. If I didn't get the scientific method going this turn, I maybe wouldn't even have the science to play the cannons for a while. So I thought that it was worth the risk of letting both 3 have the cannons. At least the way I'm playing it this turn, the cannons will be on 3 civil actions for both 3, so there'll be somewhat of a cost for them. And like I said, I thought that getting my economic upgrades going was more important than guaranteeing I would get the cannons, even though both of my Age 2 tactics are cannon tactics, and the mobile artillery in particular would be a very strong tactic for me. So it was... you could definitely make a case for just taking the cannon this turn, eating the corruption, accepting the fact that I won't be getting my science upgrades this turn. I would at least get my 3rd mine upgrade going. So I think that would have been an understandable play, but it just felt too shaky for me, especially since I really wanted this Kanmon at some point, and in order to get this going relatively soon, I really need to get these science upgrades going sooner. So that's why I buy that. I could have maybe taken the Rifleman instead of upgrading this, but again, I don't have Rifleman tactics in my hand anyway. Also, there's a second copy of Rifleman on the row. Both of my opponents have Swordsman, so if I get the chances of both of them taking Rifleman were low regardless. So I think the Rifleman was less important. Passing up the cannon is definitely more important, but again, at least both three would have to spend 3 civil actions on it. I just got the fortifications that I, if I'm getting the cannons, I would be using this tactic anyway. I draw the inhabited territory, the crime wave, and at least now I have a tactic that doesn't rely on cannons. So even if Bolt 3 takes the cannons, I will have an H2 tactic I can play, even though it's the worst H2 tactic. Bolt 3 finally plays the selective breeding, upgrades once, elects Maria, and does indeed take the cannons, unfortunately for 3 civil actions. So I will be the player without cannons in this game, which is not a place that you want to be, but like I said, I felt that my science upgrade that turn was more important. Bolt 3 is able to develop the Code of Laws finally, and upgrades the second farm. Vampires D's turn, they take their architecture, which will help them with their wonder, place their reserves, is able to finish the railroad for 2 civil actions, and takes an urban growth. Definitely a strong turn from them overall. Not entirely sure about the urban growth, but probably they valued it more than any of these other cards on the row, which is understandable. They will at least need a happy face solution at some point, so they'll be spending it on, an organized religion or a pro sports or something at least at one point. So it won't be useless for them. Now it's my turn. I definitely wanted the Rifleman, especially with the Conquistador's tactic. And I did want to... So, my choice, I think, this turn is, do I want to focus on my science or my strength? And I decided that with Vampire D now, after the railroad giving them +5 strength, I am now not the strongest. And by playing the Rifleman this turn, I'll have 6 science next turn. And then next turn, if I upgrade to Scientific Method, I will have +6 production, so I'll have 12 science in 2 turns, and that will be just enough to play the Constitutional Monarchy. So, even though I'm not upgrading my second lab this turn, I will still have enough to play the Conmon in 2 turns, which is why I decided it was worthwhile to make this military upgrade instead, to make me the strongest. I think that this event I seeded might have been a strength event too, so that might be another reason I'm doing this. Especially since I didn't seed, so I think that, yeah, I think this is a strength event, maybe an uncertain borders, and that's why I wanted to make sure I was strongest in this turn, so that's another reason to do this. Now I have 3 civil actions left. I could take this Ocean Liner service, however, next turn I'm gonna want to upgrade my second lab for sure, so I can play the Conmon in 2 turns, so that'll use up 5 resources. 2 turns from now I'll have 7, that's still not enough to build the Ocean Liner service, and I'm currently 1 civil action short of taking both the Ocean Liner service and the Engineering Genius, because I had to spend 2 civil actions taking and developing the Rifleman, which I thought, like I said, because this is a strength event, it's something I want to do anyway, I thought this was more important. It's also towards the end of H2, I think the Ocean Liner service, definitely the earlier you get it, the better. If it's in this situation where, at best, if I don't do these upgrades, I take this and the Engineering Genius, I would be able to finish it next turn, but that would be into H3 anyway, so that's a pretty late Ocean Liner service. I would be delaying my second lab upgrade, meaning I wouldn't be getting my Conmon until 3 turns from now, so that all felt like too much of a cost, especially considering how late it is in the game, where the Ocean Liner service isn't, it's extremely powerful in mid H2. When you're in H3 already, when you're completing it, it's fine, but it's definitely much less dominant, so in this situation, I do think it makes sense to pass up the Ocean Liner service. Instead, I increase my population to get out of corruption, and I take the breakthrough. I still want as much science as I can possibly get. Even after I finish my upgrades, I'll have 0 science left after the Conmon. Well, then 6 after production, but it'll be in H3. So this will take me, after I develop the Conmon, this will give me 9 science instead of 6 the next turn, and that's a huge breakpoint for H3 techs, most of which cost 9 or less, but none of which cost 6. So I think this breakthrough is definitely also a very important cut for me. More important than taking, again, the Ocean Liner service, and for reasons already stated. And with these upgrades, I'm also able to play the Conquistadors, which gives me currently 1 more strength in the medieval army, but will give me more when I put units into, put population into knights. And it also uses all my military actions before H3, which is important. Bolt 3 develops the cannons, increases the population 2 times with Maria, builds 1 cannons, and plays defensive army tactics, so they're not the weakest now. Takes the organized religion and finishes upgrading their mines. Now another weakness of my turn, again, I thought that this turn was important, but I did pass up on the Napoleon that was in the row. But again, the last two leaders in the deck are Nobel and Napoleon, so I figured even if I don't get Napoleon, I will get Nobel, who might even be better. Well, Napoleon would also be very strong for me in my position, so I definitely want either of them. But Nobel, at least, also would be pretty strong, so I was fine with winning for Nobel, even though that means that, yeah, I won't get my age 2 leader until age 3, which is definitely not where you want to be. Both the also takes the Frugality, good card with Maria. Age 3 begins. Vampire D does decide to take Napoleon instead of Nobel for the extra strength. And the military action, use that military action immediately by developing the cannons this turn. Vampire D is now the strongest, and also upgrades a farm. Good turn from Vampire D. As for me, I definitely wanted Nobel, you know, even though it's age 3 already. Having him is certainly better than not having him. I could definitely use both the strength and especially the science at this point, even with the scientific methods. I do finish upgrading them this turn. I don't need to anymore now that they have Nobel. I'd have 12 science by next turn anyway, but there wasn't anything better I wanted to use. I don't really want any of these cards regardless, except for... Yeah, I didn't even take the urban growth because I could have potentially used it in the team sports, but then I wouldn't have been able to get out of corruption because I have these unhappy workers. So to get out of corruption, I do need to increase my population. Actually, that still doesn't get me out of corruption, unfortunately. The only way to get out of corruption would have been not taking Nobel, essentially, and just increasing my population a lot. But I valued having Nobel. Nobel, there's a good... He would have been discarded after my turn, so if I wanted Nobel, I needed to stick him now. Unfortunately, he was available for 2, and so because of that, there was no way for me to get out of corruption. So I did value increasing my population over taking this urban growth. I maybe should have considered the urban growth more because I will be using it on the team sports. I will be wanting this team sport soon, so I would at least use it on that. And since I upgraded my iron mines so late, my resource situation isn't looking great, and so getting more resources from this urban growth definitely would have been valuable. So I think maybe I should have taken this instead. On the other hand, I'll want to increase my population at some point anyway. Civil actions, I'll get this Kanman soon, but still saving civil actions when you can. So using a civil action on an H2 card when it's H3 already, not the best. So I think it's kind of debatable, but maybe the urban growth would have been a better choice for me. I draw an aggression. At least I have a war in my hand and a colonization card. Now, with one full turn having passed an H3, we can take a look at the general situation again. As expected, I am still buying in culture. At least I'm pretty close to both 3 at this point, but Vampire D definitely running ahead in culture because of Nostradamus. At least I finally have my science going well now. Now, a lot of this is going to disappear from the Kanman, though I do have the breakthrough. So my major advantage over my opponents right now is definitely my science, and it's soon to be my civil actions and military actions. My major disadvantage, though, is my resources, because it took me so long to get my iron mines going, and both 3 at least has that pack to help them out with resources. Vampire D obviously has both the coal and the railroad. So my opponents definitely have the resource and the food advantage, although because I had the irrigations for longer than they had the selective breedings, our populations probably will at least be even, if not giving me the advantage because I have this vast territory. So population maybe somewhat in my advantage, science finally in my advantage, strength is pretty even right now. So the game is looking relatively even. If someone has an advantage, maybe it's Vampire D, mainly because of those resources. So Vampire D has both the culture lead without really sacrificing. I mean, they're the strongest too, so Vampire D is the strongest, has the culture lead. The economy is at least equal with that of me in both 3, if not ahead of it. So it does look like Vampire D has the advantage in this game, but anything that can happen in age 3, I do have some things going for me at least, so there is certainly hope for me to finish first still. Both 3, I think I'm probably about even with both 3 at the moment. I think we both kind of have advantages and disadvantages. Both 3 plays the organized religion and upgrades it. Needs to do that to get out of rebellion. Builds the second cannons so that they're tied with me in strength. Takes an opera. Kind of a risky maybe card to take because especially with Vampire D having Napoleon, this looks like it might end up being a military-heavy game, and putting Pop into Opera without any theater synergies. As we already covered, there aren't really theater synergies. I mean, there's Marlena, but she's the only theater synergy in H3. Internet, kind of, but there's no Hollywood, so I think the Opera is going to be a hard card to take advantage of in this game, but it is available only for one civil action. And it does synergize well with Marlena, who in my opinion is the best H3 leader, so I can also understand just wanting to set yourself up for Marlena. Also takes Frugality, again, good with Maria, and takes an Urban Growth to help with those operas. Vampire D takes the Military Theory, definitely a very good card to have, especially since Vampire D, now with Napoleon, looks like they're going to be pushing Strength. Also takes the Revolutionary Idea to help with their science. With only 4 science production, they do need science help. And takes the Organized Religion. Unfortunately, doing it this way means they will be in corruption, and also could have upgraded the coal mines but didn't, so it looks like maybe taking this Organized Religion, I mean, they will need it at some point, but not immediately. They could perhaps hope to get one of these Persports instead, and instead of the Organized Religion, they could have upgraded the coal mines. They could have maybe also not taking the Military Theory. They do have 4 military actions currently, although one of them is from Napoleon. So if they want a big war, they will need more military actions at some point. They could have perhaps, instead of the Military Theory, taken the Communism, though because they're on monarchy anyway. Now, on the other hand, that's costs more science, and they have science issues, so it is kind of a difficult turn for Vampire 3. So I still, though, think that they probably should have looked for a version of the turn that let them upgrade to a coal. They at least can get out of corruption by upgrading one of their warriors, though. Now it's my turn. I do end up seeding that colony. I am both not the weakest, so I want to seed while I'm not the weakest, and I also wanted to. Yeah, yeah, this is the Uncertain Borders, I remember now, so I definitely wanted to seed why I wasn't the weakest, so I wouldn't get hit by the Uncertain Borders at least, even though I won't win it. And the colony, I might also be able to get. I finally have a colonization card in my hand, and with the irrigation, certainly the inhabited territory might be useful for me, as much population as I can get. I especially want extra population because it looks like this is a game where if I want to win, I will probably need to get some wars going. And the more population I have to put into my armies, especially if I end up having to rely on this Conquistadors tactic, I'll need as much population as I can get. So that's also a reason to want that inhabited territory on the deck. So yeah, I do reveal the Uncertain Borders that I had seeded previously. I definitely want to play the Kanmon now that I finally can. So I think now what I had to decide on, well, I did want the Air Forces for absolutely certain. Like I said, it was but after taking the Air Forces, I kind of had to think about, okay, how do I want to win this game? I think I had 2 major alternatives available to me. One was, I think, to take one of these wonders. They are available only for 2 civil actions. And then with my last civil action, probably increase my population and build a knight or something. I think that definitely, especially the fast food chains, I think would be, it's always, right, a good wonder, and I think it's, or it's always at least a decent wonder, because you always have stuff to give it culture. And in my situation, where it looks like I'll probably be putting Pop into military, it would be maybe better than average. But fast food chains is almost never like a super good wonder. At most, you get maybe low mid-20s from it, which is still good. But another issue with fast food chains is my resource issue. Like I said, especially because I upgraded these so late, I'm gonna be operating off of not a lot of resources from now on, and so being able to scrounge up the 16 resources for the fast food chains might be difficult. And another reason I say against the fast food chains is because there's another kind of, I mean, I could, maybe the revolutionary idea, but with Nobel, my science situation was looking good. Maybe the efficient upgrade, I might not be able to play this game. I don't know if I'll ever be upgrading and building again. Journalism, I probably won't have the leeway to, because, like I said, at this point in the game, I was kind of looking at the game situation, I was looking at my economy, and I was thinking, a peaceful victory was looking pretty unlikely for me at this point. Both 3 and Vampire D are both ahead of me in culture. I currently have exactly 0 culture production. I only have 6 resource production. I don't have a architecture or engineering, so being able to build a lot of urban buildings was looking pretty doubtful for me at the current point in time. There's also not a lot of synergy available for potential peaceful solution. Maybe the space flight I could consider taking, although, again, I mean, I do have no bell, so maybe I could get some science going, but with only scientific methods, with no science leaders on the row, maybe if Bill Gates had been available earlier, I could have considered the space flight alternative, but it just didn't seem... A peaceful victory just didn't look in the cards for me at this point in time, just because urban buildings were looking out of reach for me. It took me so long to get my science going that even though I have a production now, it would probably be hard even to get a particularly big space flight. Right now the space flight is only giving me 4, 5, 7, 8, 10. I mean, I could probably get it up to 20 or the low 20s by the end of the game, but even then it wouldn't be great. And I thought that there was a more important card for me to take this turn, or actually, no, not a card. So instead of taking any cards in the row, we'll get to that next turn. I thought that it was more important for me to get this team sports for 2 reasons. First of all, obviously I have these 2 unhappy workers. There are 2 H2 events, the immigration and the civil unrest, that punish you for having unhappy workers. I don't necessarily, and either of them could potentially be in the deck, certainly. Neither of my opponents. Well, both 3 has an angry worker, but that was only because of the uncertain borders. So definitely either of my opponents could have seeded one of those unhappy worker punish events. But another important reason that I wanted to get this arena going this turn was because I had seeded a prosperity. So one of these cards is the prosperity, and I felt especially, both because I was only on irrigation and because I was kind of already looking to win militarily, I figured that I needed as much population as I could get, especially since my tactic is the conquistadors. So I wanted to guarantee that I would get good value off of that prosperity when it's revealed. So that's why I wanted to build my team sports this turn. I was also still kind of hoping that maybe Pierre could be revealed soon. And then in order to get out of corruption, I need to increase my population, and that'll use up my turn. So like I said, I decided to pass up on these wonders, mainly because a peaceful solution was looking out of reach at this point, and also my resource situation meant that it would be pretty difficult for me to be able to afford these wonders anyway. I'd have to save up for them, probably over multiple turns, or maybe hope to get yellow cards to help with them, but that's still a hope, and then I would have to not spend a lot of resources on my military or something, so it was just... It didn't seem like a winning play to me to depend on one of these wonders given at this point in the game, given my situation. And so for that reason, I wanted to instead set myself up for the prosperity and to potentially avoid those unhappy worker events. I draw an international tourism, a second colonization card, and a second war. So at least I have enough wars for a military strategy to succeed. Both 3 decides to take Mandela, increases their population once to build the organized religion, increase the population a second time and a third time. So even though they were able to take Mandela while they had unhappy workers. So that was actually, well, I guess they would have been able to do this anyway, even if they hadn't got hit by the uncertain borders. But yeah, they increase the population as much as they can while they still have Maria. Then they elect Mandela and take reserves. So I think this turn makes sense from both 3. They are giving up one of these wonders. There are 2 remaining wonders. I mean, the Manhattan Project could certainly end up being a good wonder. Even though they're only on alchemies, they also have the University S, and they also might need the strength if the game does go in a military-heavy direction. So that's another reason I think to pass up these wonders for other players, is that there's a Manhattan Project in the deck you might want instead. United Nations probably isn't going to be a good wonder for us, though. So instead, they value the reserves over taking the wonder. And they build a swordsman, and a second swordsman, which actually makes them the strongest. Vampire D seeds, reveals an arms industry. At least I get more resources than my opponents do out of that. Vampire D chooses to build the space flight, notably, even though they're only on 4 science production, but they do have a revolutionary idea in their hand, and maybe they're looking to get more science production going. It's also still going to be a better wonder from them on the internet, so they probably just wanted a wonder in general. They definitely, unlike both 3 and me, they are absolutely going to have enough resources to afford it with the coal plus railroad. They do finally get their coal upgrades done as well, and they take a second revolutionary idea, especially will help them with the space flight, and they adopt the defensive army tactic, better tactic than the Legion tactic. even though I am the weakest, I decide to siege because, partly, that is the crime wave, by the way. Partly because I kind of wanted the crime wave in the deck. Like I said, at this point in the game, as we'll see, I'm definitely going to end up going military heavy. So it's probably because I wanted the crime wave in the deck. If I'm going military heavy, then my next turns are probably going to be eaten up by wars regardless. And, so another reason I wanted to get that, I wanted to move the event deck forward because I also wanted that prosperity to get revealed earlier. So that, because I don't know if my opponents are going to siege, so I wanted to increase the chances that the prosperity gets revealed before I start wanting to... I was thinking to maybe even as soon as next turn. I'll have enough science for the air forces, so I was kind of looking to next turn possibly get a war going. So I wanted to increase the odds that the prosperity would be revealed before I would declare a war next turn. The card that gets revealed is the strategic territory. I do have enough colonization cards to bid 9 for it, which I think is what I ended up bidding. So I do have the inhabited territory in the deck too, but I thought the strategic territory... I think the main reason I wanted the strategic territory was I was hoping to draw an H3 tactic, right? Conquistador is definitely not the ideal tactic you'd want. I did pass up the cavalryman earlier, but I do have the rockets that I can take this turn. So if I get a tactic with... if I get an infantry artillery tactic, H3 tactic, I will be able to play that. So that was the main thing I was looking for. It's also possible that I might be able to get the tanks, although maybe I won't have enough science for tanks, rockets, and air forces. Maybe I will, though, as we'll see on my turn. But anyway, I was mainly looking for one of those infantry artillery H3 tactics with the strategic territory. Also, the extra 4 strength could come in handy. I ended up being able to win it only for 1 unit in the colonization cards. As we can see, I do get those colonization cards back immediately, so I think it was right to bid to win this territory. Unfortunately, I don't draw a tactic. But I did select Winston Churchill, especially now we're about almost halfway through Age 3. I still haven't done any cultural protection yet. It's looking like I won't be able to. I mean, I could take the movies, and maybe the next turn again, though only 6 income. I don't have enough science to get movies and multimedia, movies or multimedia and engineering. So a peaceful victory was looking way out of the question for me at this point. I kind of had to win with military. And so for that reason, I picked Churchill, even though I think Marlena is generally a better leader than Churchill in a vacuum. When I know for sure I'm going to be pushing military super hard, and especially since I only have this 3 resource income, and also the 8 science, not as much as I might want, especially if I'm going to play the rockets at some point, or the tanks. I think this is a situation where Churchill is the best actually probably the best Age 3 leader in the deck, period, for me. So I definitely wanted him in this situation. I don't play him yet, though, because I think if I played him this turn, maybe I wouldn't be out of corruption, or I think mainly it's because, it's partly because, well, I guess I could lose the 2 strength from, well, what's he might turn into being? I do bet a second arena, again, to get me more from the prosperity, and I'll need it anyway, you know, I'll be into this area of my yellow bank at some point anyway, so it's not like this will be a forever useless team sport, so it'll give me a bit of strength too, and like I said, will give me 3 extra food from the prosperity. I do take the rockets. Like I said, there's still a chance I'll draw an H3 tactic that will need the rockets, so I do want to make sure I have it in my hand. And I take the reserves and the military build-up. So yeah, okay, this was the main reason I didn't play Churchill, I think, this turn, was because obviously a weakness of Nobel, when you replace him, you don't get your civil action back. So I wouldn't have been able to do the same turn while playing Churchill. I would have had to give up doing something, maybe building the arena or something, or taking the reserves. But I definitely wanted both the reserves and the military build-up because I need as many resources as I can possibly get if I'm going to get a big war going with my Iron Mines, even with Churchill's bonus. So I really wanted these yellow cards, I wanted the rockets, I wanted to build the team sports, so with all the things I wanted to do this turn, I didn't have the civil actions to spell for Churchill, and the extra 2 science I'll get from keeping Nobel around might also be useful, especially since Nobel Prize, if I want to win a Nobel Prize or 2, I'll need as much science as I can get. I discard basically cards that aren't the wars and the impact of competition, which is the only impact I was kind of having any hope for really winning. I do draw a 3rd war and some aggressions. Bull 3 Seeds does reveal that prosperity, thankfully, so that does help me out a lot. So I was glad to have seeded that. Bull 3 takes the engineering, plays it, and develops the opera, so they are getting those operas going. On the other hand, they did spend, how much science was this? 16 science on these 2 cards, so that'll be something maybe to keep in mind for later. And they do take the Air Forces, though. Now, they won't have enough science, though, to play the Air Forces next turn. They'll be 1 science short. So even though they have the Air Forces in their hand, they won't be able to play it next turn because they chose to play these 2 cards instead. Even though we can see the engineering, they could have built the opera even without the engineering. It just saved them 2 resources. So that'll be important to keep in mind because Vampire D does actually war Bull 3. Now it's a war of technology and not a war of culture, but it is still a war. And Vampire D is able to get 2 armies going with Napoleon, as well as the military theory. So they definitely have a lot of strength that they're pushing. However, we can see, well, on my turn, I decide to see that impact instead of playing a war because I calculated out the strength that Bull 3 will get, and Bull 3 will actually be able to get 46 strength on their turn because of the reserves and notably the fundamentalism, which was on the road during Vampire D's turn, and the Acropolis obviously is helping them with the fundamentalism. So because of that and the units they'll be able to build, Bull 3 will be able to get up to 46 strength. And I'm not able to get up to 46 strength on my turn, so I didn't want to war them yet. Instead, I seeded the Impact of Competition, which I'll want to seed anyway, so that's a use of my political action regardless. Independence Declaration is revealed. It costs Bull 3 the wealthy territory, but, you know, not the most painful colony to lose, just losing some blue cubes. I do choose Churchill, and I'm fine because I do choose Churchill finally, and I will use him and that military buildup because I am the weakest after losing Nobel. So that gives me a bunch of resources that I can use to build 2 air forces for essentially free, because I got 13 from Churchill and the military buildup. Increase my population 1 more time to get out of corruption, and I take this revolutionary idea. I am partly because to give me the potential to get some Nobel Prizes. So even with the science boost from Churchill, next one I'll have 13, and this will cost 5. That'll give me 8. But there still might be other cards I might want to play, especially I think I was eyeing maybe the 2nd copy of Military Theory. So I thought that getting more science definitely was always good. I didn't want, pro sports. The team sports were doing well for me anyway. PR couldn't take mechanized agriculture. I wasn't going to have the leeway to upgrade. All my resources are going into military from now on. Same for the multimedia. So I didn't want any of these cards above that. I could have potentially cut the fundamentalism from Bull 3, but I was also kind of thinking that Vampire D... I didn't want to cut the fundamentalism for Bull 3 because basically I think Bull 3 is that the last copy of Revolutionary Idea? Yeah, so I just took the last copy of Revolutionary Idea. So even if Bull 3 is basically going to have to choose between playing the fundamentalism or playing the air forces like for the rest of the game, because if they play the fundamentalism, they're not going to be able to play the air forces for 2 more turns. So I was comfortable leaving the fundamentalism to Bull 3 because I figured that even if they played the fundamentalism, they wouldn't be able to play the air forces. So I didn't see the need to cut the fundamentalism, and I valued the other things I was using my civil actions for above that as well. So I just took the revolutionary idea instead. I do, however, build a 4th knight because especially if I don't get that military theory, then I'm only going to have 2 civil actions left after I declare a war, which unfortunately even at this stage won't be enough to get me a 3rd army going. But I still, in general, just want to spend as many military actions as I can before I declare a war, so that I'll have, less military actions to spend during the war. Even though that'll cost me a draw, I kind of have all the cards I want in my hand already. I kind of just want the wars from now on. I do draw, however, an Impact of Colonies, which I might be able, which is suitable. Bull 3 offers me the military alliance. So, like I said, the reason I accepted this was because I did the calculations and figured out that on their turn they would get 46 strength anyway, so they would be able to beat Vampire D with or without my help. And I thought that beating Vampire D for 6 or beating them by 9 wouldn't really make a big difference. So I kind of figured that this military alliance, if anything, would help me more, because if theoretically maybe I'd rather war Vampire D than Bull 3, and if that's the case, then the military alliance would help me out. So that's the main reason I accepted it. And we can see Bull 3 does indeed choose to develop the fundamentalism, increases the population by the 3rd cannon, destroys a lab for a 5th swordsman, and destroys the 2nd lab for a 6th swordsman. So with that, they have 49 strength, which is enough to win this war against Vampire D. However, they chose to destroy their labs to do it. They are now on precisely 0 science income because the universal task is cancelled out by the fundamentalism, which we might see that cost. They choose to take the computers a little maybe optimistically, but I mean these cards, the only cards they had left for one civil action were technologies anyway, so maybe it was denying to Vampire D, which also makes sense because Vampire D does have the space flight. So that does cause Bull 3 to win the war in technology, but it's not by enough to take any of the blue text or any of the blue text that Bull 3 wanted from Vampire D, so they just take the science directly. But Vampire D does have the 2 revolutionary ideas they can still play, which is enough to develop the modern infantry and upgrade twice, so it looks like they still have military designs, and they take a patriotism and the reserves, and even upgrade all of their swordsmen to modern infantry and build 2 stages of the space flight. So it definitely looks like at this point Vampire D is only planning on spending the resources on military and space flight. Now it's my turn, so at this point I definitely wanted to get my wars going. Age 3, looks like this is going to be my 3rd to last turn in the game, so I'm only going to have 2 more turns to war anyway, so there's no reason not to war now, I think. Especially since this military theory is available for me, so the military actions costing me are not a big deal. And I war Bull 3 because, again, Bull 3 played the fundamentalism and destroyed their labs, they do not have enough science to play the air forces anymore, which means that all they have to defend themselves is 9 resources, which isn't even enough to build another full army. So Bull 3's military potentiality is extremely capped, whereas Vampire D, even though they are the player without the air forces, with the modern infantry and the cannons, they might even have an age 3 military tactic to give them even more strength. So, and also with the patriotism and the reserves and the resource income naturally, they have way more of an ability to push strength than Bull 3 does. So I think I probably wouldn't have been able to beat Vampire D in a war, but I can beat Bull 3 in a war, as we will see. I play the military theory, which along with Churchill's resources is enough to actually let me build a full army. I decide I need to keep these both for strength and for the happy faces. I want to keep the mines because I'm going to do another war next turn and I'm going to need resources for that. So I decided to destroy 2 of my labs and a farm instead for the extra population. Unfortunately, I don't have enough resources or civil actions to play a 3rd air force, but this is still 3 armies, 2 air forces, gives me 69 strength, nice, which is still a fair amount. But that also is everything I can do on my turn. Bull 3 Siege reveals a crime wave. At least my opponents are hit by this card. Finally destroys their theater and a mine and a second mine so that they can get another tactic going, which at least puts them up to 54 strength. So they'll lose the war, quote unquote, only by 15. But so that'll be a 40 culture swing. So Bull 3 is currently ahead by 45 culture. So we'll be almost tied in culture after this war. Also gets a patriotism. Obviously, you know, both we can tell military is coming for me. I need to get more resources to defend myself. Also takes the satellites. Won't be able to play it with only the 7 science, but it's at least it's probably again a denial for Vampire D and for me. And takes the tanks again, perhaps also as a denial, and the endowment of the arts, which at this rate looks like they might be able to use. And Vampire D now declares a war of culture against Bull 3. They're able after upgrading the Organized Religion, playing the Patriotism, putting 2 more cannons, and they indeed do have an H3 military tactic, the Positional Army, so that does push them up to 70 strength, which would have beaten me if I had warred them. And I take an Engineering Genius to help with the space flight. That's the end of Age 3. So the war finishes, so now we can see I'm 10 culture behind both 3, but that's not enough. I want to war them again. Again, if we look at their relative situations, both 3 now only has these 6 resources from this and the Patriotism, so they are, with only that 7 science, the amount of strength they can push is extremely capped, whereas Vampire D still has these 18 resources. With the Engineering Genius, it'll only cost them 13 minus 8. It'll cost them 8 to finish the space flight, so they'll still have 14 resources with the reserves to put into their army. They that's enough to get plus 10 up to 76 at least. So, and with me, I really only have enough resources to get this 3rd Air Force. So I would have, so I would have only been able to beat Vampire D by 3 points. So I would have gotten an 8 culture swing against Vampire D. I would have gotten a 16 culture swing against Vampire D if I had warred them, which I figured if I warred Vampire D, even though, well, first of all, Vampire D could choose, instead of finishing the space flight, to defend against me instead. They would have had 22, which is 7, 14. So that's not enough to get a 3rd army, but that is enough to get 5, 10, to get plus 13 against me, 79. So Vampire D could have chosen to just tie against me instead of finishing the space flight. They probably would have chosen to finish the space flight anyway, but again, they still would have gotten 76 strength, which meant I would only get plus 8 strength. And so if I had warred Vampire D, I was afraid there was a risk that I would actually finish 3rd, right? Because even though I would have gotten a 16 culture swing against Vampire D is going to get more than 16 culture from the space flight, and they're ahead of culture of me right now anyway. So even if I warred Vampire D, probably, almost certainly I wouldn't be able to overtake them anyway, and I would then run the risk of finishing below Bull 3 as well. There's also a metagame consideration where, as we know, Bull 3 and I are the ones competing for first place in the group, so it's more important for Bull 3 to lose than for Vampire D to lose when we consider the tournament as a whole. But again, even if we discount that more, metagaming consideration, I think if I had warred Vampire D, I would have laid a huge risk of finishing 3rd, whereas by warring Bull 3, I am at least guaranteeing that I'll finish 2nd. Now, as for the rest of my turn, because this is kind of all I can really realistically put into my military, I was thinking of how I could maximize my culture. The one impact I've seeded is the impact of competition. So for that reason, I decided the pro sports would be nice, because it would not only help me out with the impact I know I have, the impact of competition, but if there happens to be an impact of architecture in the deck, that would also help me with that. So I decided that this would be a better use of my time. It would also help me out with an impact of happiness, potentially. So after doing this, I kind of will have almost nothing to do next turn regardless, so it almost doesn't matter. But I figured the few amounts of extra culture and potential extra culture I get from the pro sports are better than anything else I could possibly do with my remaining civil actions. So I do play it this turn. I have enough resources to upgrade 1, and I also take the efficient upgrade. So next turn with the reserves and the efficient upgrade, I'll be able to build a pro sports directly and upgrade 1. So at least I have the 3 pro sports, which will help me with that impact of competition, and also again with potential impact of architecture and happiness. So the last turn of the game, both 3 seeds, reveals an inhabited territory. Oh yeah, Vampire D. Oh yeah, another reason I didn't war against Vampire D, I forgot. Vampire D, I forgot, also warred against Bull 3, which means that Vampire D would definitely finish ahead of me even if I warred them. Whereas this way, I will at least guarantee I'll finish ahead of Bull 3. Bull 3 wins because neither Vampire D nor I want to sacrifice any strength while the wars are ongoing. Bull 3 plays both of their yellow cards, is able to get up to 60 strength, and take some cards. Vampire D gets 11 culture from their war. Vampire D also seeds, reveals the impact of balance. Both 3 and I, very weak impact of balance for everyone, but Vampire D does get slightly more culture. finishes the Space Light for 21 culture, takes Ganji, only leader left on the board, at least will give them 2 extra culture, and increases the population and builds a second temple for a little bit of extra culture. So now I get a stronger war against both 3. So I try this aggression. I basically, so if we look at the culture situation, both 3 is definitely losing this game, whereas Vampire D looks very likely to win it. So I did consider seeding the impact of colonies, but we can see the impact of colonies, if I seeded it, would give me +6 culture against Vampire D because I get +3 from seeding it and +3 from the impact itself. But I thought that even with that extra 6 culture from Vampire D and even with the impact of competition, which I calculated out, I would almost certainly not overtake Vampire D with any set of remaining impacts in the deck. So I figured, even though I thought it was unlikely that I would be able to win this aggression against Vampire D, I thought that the only possible chance I had of winning this game was succeeding in the armed intervention. So that's why I traded, but indeed Vampire D could defend. So I do what I planned to do last turn, which is get those 3 pro sports, and I take some cards for fun at the end. So I get an extra 3 culture from Churchill. So we can say at the end of the game, both 3 is almost certainly going to lose, is 43 culture behind me. I am 30 culture behind Vampire D, so it looks, it's going to be hard for any set of impacts to change the order from this set of 3, but we'll see how it goes anyway. First impact is an impact of agriculture, which both 3 does the best at. Second impact is the impact of industry, which Vampire D does the best at. Both 3 and I both wrecked our minds for the wars. Third impact is impact of competition. This one, Vampire D gets +20. I actually got +30. It's, I think, pretty rare to see an impact of competition give this much culture, so that's pretty funny. Fortunately, because Vampire D had all those military units from their wars, I only get +10 against Vampire D from it. Next is the impact of wonders, which I also lose out on to the other 2 players. And the final impact is the impact of harmony, which I also lose out on. Vampire D wins by far the most because, again, both 3 and I had to wreck our economies more in order to get population into our militaries. So at the end of the game, Vampire D ends up winning by a whole lot, 44 points. At least, I do get second against both 3, though. So this game, looking it over and figuring out where things went wrong for me, it was a little hard to pinpoint one exact place. It felt like more of an accumulation of things. I got my iron upgrades in late, and also I didn't get any alchemies in. So I think the major advantage Vampire D had on me, at least in the early game, was Vampire D at least had these alchemies going. And because Vampire D had these alchemies, they were in a better position to get the coals instead of the irons. Like, I was in a position potentially to get the coals too, but I decided against it because I really needed the scientific method. Whereas Vampire D, because they had the alchemies, they were able to wait for the coals, which was definitely a benefit because in this game the irons came so late. And in my case in particular, I waited until mid-age 2 to upgrade my irons. So that was one place where things went wrong. Another place where things went wrong, obviously, was I had Columbus, which I had Columbus with vast territory, which is strong. But in this game, maybe I should have more closely considered the fact that there are kind of only 3 good H2 leaders. I mean, Darwin, Gotti, Cook, Shakespeare, maybe they could have theoretically been good, had things gone differently, but I think, realistically speaking, Nobel, Maria, and Napoleon are the strong H2 leaders in this game. And so for that reason, taking Columbus is more of a risk, maybe than it usually is, even with having the vast territory in my hand, because of what actually ended up happening in this game, where I went literally the entirety of H2 with no leader, because the first good leader, Maria, was taken by both 3. I could have taken her, but prioritized other things instead. And then the other 2 good leaders didn't show up until the very end of the age. So that was definitely another, like, bad thing that happened. Now, even in retrospect, though, I think the place that I did instead of, say, taking the alchemy, I don't even know if I had an opportunity to take an alchemy realistically, or taking Maria, or the things that I chose to do instead on those turns also felt important. And, you know, you could say, you know, you're always tempted to blame luck in these situations, when I do think, you know, the game situation ended up in a state where I had those late irons, where I didn't get my government form until age 3, where I had to rely on the Conquistador's tactic because I didn't have any cannons. I didn't draw any H3 tactics until literally the very end. So, definitely those you could say were unlucky, but on the other hand, with Through the Ages, there's always things you could have done differently. So, even though I didn't notice... I mean, there's always mistakes you can make, and I think I did point out a couple places where it seems that I made a mistake. In general, I don't think I noticed any huge blunders. If you did, please let me know. If you noticed, like, any place where I could have done something obviously differently. But I think it was partly just, instead of individual, like, turns being wrong, it felt more like my overall strategy in this game was wrong. It's just nothing went right. I didn't get my economy going until late. I didn't get my government going until late. Yeah, so I think, like I said, it was my overall strategy that felt like it didn't work out for me. So that makes it harder to point out, like, I should have done something wrong at this point, or at this point. It's more like I should have, at some point, when I started noticing things were going wrong, and I think where things started going wrong, I think, was when it was at the end of Age 1 and I hadn't upgraded any of my economic buildings yet. And so I think I should have been aware at that point, you know, we're getting on in Age 1, I'm not upgrading my economy yet, that's a problem. And even though the irons weren't available until late, I should have noticed that like, the Age 1 was progressing without any economic upgrades happening, and I should have prioritized more strongly. I did have that irrigation in my hand for a while without playing it. I mean, I played other things instead, but maybe I should have just played that irrigation earlier just to have something going for me, economically speaking, before the middle of Age 2. So, I guess in retrospect, that was my major issue. Just not seeing early enough that the game was going in a wrong direction for me. And thus, if I had noticed that, then maybe I could have taken, like, instead of being more on autopilot, I could have more deliberately shifted the game onto a different track that was more favorable for me. But instead, I just kind of let things play out where my economy was so bad for so long. And in the end, Vampire D's economic advantage ended up enabling them to get this victory over me. Now, that being said, even though I did finish second in the game, in terms of the overall state of the group, a more important result is that Bull 3 finished last. And so result, well, we can see already that Bull 3 and Vampire D's two-player game finished, which Vampire D won. But even if Bull 3 had won that two-player game against Vampire D and had won their last two-player game against me, that would have only given me them plus 8 points, which would not be enough to overtake me. So because I finished ahead of Bull 3 in that game, I am guaranteed to finish first in the group, which means I am guaranteed to be in the upper bracket again in round 3, which definitely was my goal here, and so I was satisfied with. So even though I ended up getting second in both of these 3-player games, it was still good enough with my victory against Aaron Weber in the 2-player game and my 2 4-player game victories to know that I will finish first even before all the games have been finished. Just means I can kind of relax a bit with my last 2-player games, maybe. As for the other players, we can see Aaron Weber has finished all of his games, and unfortunately, they are guaranteed to finish last. And so in the second round, if you finish last in the upper bracket, you are dropped from the tournament. So Aaron Weber was, even though he was the seeded player in this group, he ends up losing and being one and done in the tournament, which in a tournament like the World Championship, which is kind of set up to encourage, like, you'll at least have 2 chances with the upper and lower bracket system. It is possible sometimes for this outcome to occur, so which is unfortunate. But that being said, Aaron Weber, you know, did play well in some games. I mean, we did note some of the perhaps misplays that they made or places where he could have improved his game. But the fact that also he was a seeded player and was, I think, in the 400s in Glico shows that he's not a bad player. So definitely hope that Aaron Weber continues playing in tournaments and continues improving. I'll talk maybe a little bit more about all of my opponents at the end of all my games. The last 2 games I have are a 2-player game against Bull 3 and Vampire D, respectively. Now, like I said, the outcome of those games doesn't matter in terms of the overall standings of the group, and it matters who will finish second and third. But that is kind of irrelevant. But there are a couple of reasons that I still want to win those two-player games. First of all, through most of those games, it wasn't clear that I was guaranteed to finish first, so they were important for that reason. And there's also, they obviously will matter for the Glico rating. Both 3 and Vampire D are unrated in Glico, so if I lose to them, I will probably lose a fair amount of Glico, so that's a motivation for me to beat them. And there's also always a pride reason. You always want to win, so those games will still matter, so I hope that you will watch those videos too when I upload them, and I also hope you enjoyed this video. As always, please leave a comment if you have any ideas or, praises or criticisms of either my play in Through the Ages or my video making. I want to improve in both areas. If you have any other ideas of why I finished second in this game, of things I could have done differently to possibly win the game instead, please let me know. Either way, I hope you have a great weekend.